the forgiveness of you forgiving yourself has allowed you to have that greater loving kindness towards others.
Yeah, because earlier in earlier moments or periods of my grieving, it was like I had the sense that I had made such an incredible error with Edward, and I felt so much guilt around that. That the way I was sitting with it then, before the forgiveness came in, was, oh well, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm not here to do what I thought I'm here to do. I can't help people the way that I'm thought that I'm here to help people. Like all of that was sort of like closed off because of this sense of, or was kind of closing down because of this sense of having really just messed up so badly with someone so important to me.
So, today we are going to dive into the topic of forgiveness, specifically forgiveness during a grieving process. And there's a metaphor that I want to introduce right off the bat, which is from the book The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. He's an amazing author. I recommend for everyone to read that book once a year. And the metaphor is about poison. So, the way that Don Miguel Ruiz describes it is that when someone does something to wrong you, they have poison in their bodies, and that's what drove them to do the harmful action. And then by doing the harmful action, they passed that poison on to you. And so oftentimes, so we're just going to be talking about poison a lot in this episode. And when we say the word poison, we're not referring to actual liquids that you would slip into someone's drink, but it's the metaphor of, it's almost a metaphor of pain,
Mm.
of passing pain along. Of this pain is mine, and because I have so much of it, I'm passing it on to you. But the word poison can be a little bit more easy to conceptualize and materialize than the concept of pain because pain is so broad.
Yeah. I do liken this concept, though, to the phrase we sometimes hear. I've definitely used it a bunch myself: hurt people,
Yes.
and sort of like passing on that hurt in much the same way as this poison metaphor, which I really do like.
Mhm. So, the way that I work through forgiveness with my clients is I always tell them that forgiveness does not mean that you ever need to speak to the person again, or that you ever need to have a relationship with them again, or you need to lower your boundaries or let them walk all over you. It just means that you are deciding to let that person's poison go.
Mm.
So you're deciding to no longer hold it on yourself and to let it release from you so that you don't carry their poison anymore, which in turn means that you're not going to give that poison on to anyone else.
The other thing that I want to add to that is that we don't have to like be over or like or stop not liking what happened in order to offer forgiveness to ourselves and to the other person involved or people involved. And it's not, many of us think of forgiving someone as a service. It's like something we're giving to them. And if we give that to them, then we've somehow either lost power or we've lost the ability to get them to do something different, or we've signaled to them that it's okay for them to treat us this way. And I really want to create a distinction there, if possible, that forgiveness isn't about giving something to the other person necessarily, or washing the board clear of the things that happened. It's this choice of ending the cycle of continuing to poison each other or carry that poison.
That is such an important distinction as well. I hear a lot of people say, but if I forgive them, then they win,
Yeah. Yeah.
as though the hurt person is somehow keeping a leg up by holding on to resentment and anger.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, within this topic of forgiveness, there's kind of two categories of people to forgive that we wanted to discuss today. One is forgiving the person who died or who is no longer in your life. And the second is forgiving yourself. And then there's a whole bunch of other things to forgive along a grieving process that we'll get to later on, but those are the two major ones are forgiving the person who is no longer here and forgiving yourself for whatever guilt or anger there might be there.
Yeah. Maybe let's start with forgiving the other since we already introduced that concept through this
Mhm.
poison
That sounds
metaphor.
good.
Yeah.
So to forgive the other, to forgive the person who's no longer here that you're grieving, this kind of really gets into the topic of complicated circumstances. What I'm referring to right now is when this other person has actually hurt you. Perhaps they were abusive in some way in their life, or they were just toxic or wrong, and now they're gone, and you are feeling anger towards them, and that's not often a very validated emotion in the grieving process, even though it's technically one of the 5 stages of grief. When anyone tends to express anger towards a dead person, society tends to gaslight them and say, "Just remember the good things now that they're
Yeah.
gone. You can't speak ill of the dead."
Yeah. Oh gosh. That one is, I think, so hard for so many of us grievers because there's so many feelings and it's really complex to wade through. But then, if there is this sort of sticking point between us and the person who's passed or who's no longer in our lives, then it really can create this like sand in the grease, so to speak. This sort of real sticking point that can be hard to get around and hard to navigate. And then, like you're saying, if what we're met with is, our support people saying, "Oh, remember them how you would prefer to, remember them, or remember them at their best, or think, only think kind thoughts of them," or the litany of other things in that same vein that we often get met with. Yeah, it can have this experience for many of us of like the grieving process kind of getting stopped up because there's this feeling that we don't know what to do with, and we want to, like, we may have the impulse to forgive, but we're not sure if it's okay to, or if we'll let them win, or what will happen if we do. And then we're getting met with these messages of, just forget that stuff that's still bothering you. And so it can just be this real push pull experience in the grieving process.
Mhm. And the anger towards the person who has passed, the anger is very often a fight response. So if we open up the 4 Fs, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, when that person has wronged you, oftentimes the anger is your defensive mechanism, and it's a really good defensive mechanism. It's good that you have it to protect yourself from further subjecting yourself to their harm. And the fact that they're no longer here on this earth means that you actually don't need that defensive mechanism anymore towards that specific person because they're gone.
Yeah, literally.
And that actually is a safe time to let it go,
Mm,
at the very least towards that person who was harmful.
yeah. So there, yeah, I love that you're bringing up that part. There really can be this, especially in that early period of grieving, as we've talked about, this first few to several weeks, especially where there's a greater likelihood of more survival reactivity to be up. It's real common for if we have some anger or something that that's sort of between us and the person, for that to come into a phase of fight. Absolutely. And then, you know, there can be a really fuzzy border between that experience and, the more emotional brain version of just some anger or some resentment or some hurt or, some confusion about the interactions or relationship we had before they were no longer with us. And it can be hard to delineate the difference between those experiences, but I'm mentioning it because there can be this kind of range of, you know, the experience of something is not right between me and my loved one, and now they're gone. And so I'm the only one who can deal with it.
Mhm. Mhm. Which is why it's very tempting to just spiritually bypass that and only speak positively of the dead.
Yeah.
And that doesn't actually help with emotional processing or releasing of feelings. It just stuffs them deeper, which creates more problems later.
Yeah, and like we're saying, it can actually be a block to your own grieving process that
Mhm.
you can't get around because you don't know what to do with that part. And I mean, so we're talking about so far the kind of complicated situation that can exist between us and our loved one before they passed. And there's probably more to say about that, but there's also the part of just like you're gone and now I'm here without you, and I feel anger around that.
Mhm.
And sometimes
Yeah.
like it's directed at our loved one too.
Mhm. Mhm. So I think that for me and the process that has worked for a lot of my clients, the way through this anger is to really sit with that person did their best given their
Mm.
circumstance. And often their best was really harmful to me. But I'm going to decide that I'm not going to let that person's pain continue transmitting through me to other people surrounding me.
Mm. Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to choose to forgive them, to release their poison so that it stops with me.
I think that's such an important choice point to get to, and to make that decision for ourselves when it's right for us to do that, and
Mhm.
to like allow that to be the best version of a line in the sand for ourselves, right? And we cross
Mhm.
that threshold. But I do think it's important to make sure that we don't. I don't want to rush anyone to that threshold,
Mhm.
because it's
Absolutely.
important for us to sit with. You're gone, and I still feel these uncomfortable feelings. I don't know what to do with around you,
Yeah.
if not at you. I still feel anger. I still feel resentment. I still feel hurt at the way things went, and giving ourselves room to sit with that experience, to breathe through it and honor it and give it as much space as we can, to give it expression through different forms, as we've talked about before, if we're able to do that. I think, this is one place in particular where it can be really useful to use our bodies to physically do some expressing of this emotion that doesn't have anywhere to go because we don't have the person to work it out with anymore. Right.
Mhm.
So giving ourselves plenty of room to have and to be with, to emote and to express those feelings, and then approach that threshold of, okay,
Mhm.
like I've had what I needed to have around it, and there may be more that comes up later, but I'm now ready to cross this threshold of, you know not carrying the pain that we shared to someone else.
Mhm. Thank you for adding that nuance. And I think that in that process of going through the feelings and emoting, that is such a good opportunity to write a letter to the person, even though they're dead.
Yeah.
You can still write them a letter and you can plant a tree over the letter and pour water over it, or you can burn it, whatever floats your boat.
Hmm.
But it's very important to get the words and the feelings about everything that happened out.
Yeah. Yes. I love what you're saying too about, writing it. I've done various versions of that. Even if it's just a journal entry that you never intend on making into a letter and sending to them, just like the list of grievances by itself
Mhm.
can be so powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when that moment comes where you're drawing the line in the sand and saying, "I'm not gonna let your pain give me pain anymore," I wanna make it very clear that as much as it feels like a permanent solution in that moment, it's actually a daily choice
Hmm.
and a daily commitment to letting that anger go and to choosing to not pass that pain on, because that pain kind of hangs out and we have to constantly soothe and constantly heal it in order to have the opportunity to have the choice to not act on it and to choose kindness and to choose love in our daily interactions.
Yeah. Yes. I think I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression about either the ease of that choice and crossing that threshold, or the any sense that they're doing it wrong if they come up against another moment later. They've sat with the feelings. They've decided, okay, I'm forgiving for me and for my other person and for the other people in my life. I'm crossing that threshold, and then I make the choice the next day and the next day and the next day to stay in that forgiveness. Well, a week later, another round of anger might come up, and that's okay.
Mhm.
That's not wrong. We haven't messed up or blown our forgiveness. We've just gotten another opportunity to do that same process with another
Mhm.
layer. So
Mhm.
sitting with that anger or resentment or hurt or whatever version that is, giving it room, giving it expression, and then being willing to cross that threshold again. Okay,
Mhm.
I've sat with this part and I'm willing to forgive you and me and whatever else is involved in this part too.
This kind of reminds me of our episode, Waves of Grief, Learning to Surf Emotions, because we talk about in that episode how each time the wave of grief comes up, you learn to surf it better and better. And it's almost as though this has a similar feel to it, that each time the anger and the resentment and the pain comes up is an opportunity to learn to move through it and learn to forgive it. And each
Mm.
time it often is easier, but not always.
Yeah. 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 Yes. And giving ourselves that repetition, remembering that any one feeling in our grieving process is a feeling for now, but the process is a process. It
Mhm.
continues on and on and on, growing and transforming us as we continue with it.
Yeah. So then to go into forgiving yourself, this one is often so much harder and so much longer of a process to do. And we
Yeah.
just talked about how long of a process it is to forgive the other person.
Hmm.
Why don't you start?
Well, what immediately comes up for me in thinking about it is the episode we did on guilt, guilt that comes
Mhm.
up in grief and how frequently and common and regular it is for so many of us to have a little to a lot of guilt or shame or humiliation or embarrassment or a range of feelings around the sense that either before they passed or they were no longer in our lives or in the grieving of them that we have not done everything that we wanted to do.
Mhm.
And so there can be this sense of they're gone and I didn't do right by them. And similar to the equation of if there's something that you have the sense that they did that you didn't like, we're stuck with it and they're gone. And so what else can we do? We can't go to them. We can't, process it with them and have them say, oh, like, I love you. I forgive you. It's not a big deal. We're okay. You have to do that for yourself around something that there's just zero chance of you being able to take back or do a better version of with
Mhm.
this
Which is
person.
why it's so hard and it takes so much time. I think that most people's inner critic is so much more harsh than people's critic towards other people. And it's
Mm,
that inner critic that's constantly saying in your mind that you could have done better, that you should have done better, that you should have done differently. When in reality, you probably did your best given that circumstance.
yeah. Yeah. It's so hard, like you're saying. I don't actually have a very strong inner critic anymore.
That's
It's
great.
just not part of my makeup. I have a lot of compassion for myself most of the time, but I've felt real shock and startlement around some of the things I've heard in my head in my grieving process around Edward, and things I know. Like, I think one of the problems is that there is real truth to some of the things we recognize that we could have done, right?
Mhm.
And it's not just gaslighting ourselves or being hard on ourselves or like trained self-criticism. It's literally having the sense, oh, like I could have done X, Y, and Z differently, and I definitely now would have preferred that I had
Mhm.
done a range of things differently. So, but we're just sort of, we're left with it because we can't go to the person and say, I I really effed up. I really wish I had done all these other things, or I wish I hadn't done. So, we're then we sit with it, and
Mhm.
even like I said, even if we're not really critical at ourselves, there can be this just like really understandable material that comes up around that we may not be used to viewing ourselves in that capacity, maybe because we're not that critical with ourselves. But if we're used to being critical with ourselves, it's just like another round of, well, you're crappy then too, and you should have been better. It's just such an additionally trying part of dealing with having lost someone passing that we care about.
Do you
Hmm.
have an example? Do you have a story or of that happening in your life?
Well, okay, so classic example with my brother Edward, like, in my mind, even still, we are back to back. I mean, that's like our orientation in life. Like, I had his back, he had mine, and but we, living our own lives and oriented that way. But there was something about that it was so grounding and so foundational, and like really experiencing not having it. But we always had this understanding that, again, like, the idea was we had each other's back, and if we ever needed anything, we would be there for each other, and we often were. Except that Edward in particular wasn't especially good at asking for help. I'm not much better, but he's really did a lot on his own. And so now I'm regularly sitting with ways, knowing what I know, doing what I do, being who I am, that I could have supported him and helped him with things that he was struggling with in his life that he wasn't asking for help with.
Mhm.
And it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I just now wish that I had been like, I know that you're not asking for help, but I see you and I love you and I want to be here for you. Tell me what I can do.
Mhm.
And if he were right here with me, he would shrug and say, there's nothing to forgive. Like, you were there for me. You had my back.
Mhm.
So, but because I am now where I am, I see, things I could have done, things that I wish I had done, even just being in the moments that we had longer, or responding to a text or a call from him sooner,
Mhm.
or more frequently, or any of those kind of things that are not things that you can anticipate when you're living with someone and then they're suddenly gone. But from the perspective of them being gone, you look back and you go, oh, I definitely could have turned up the volume on a lot of moments we had, or times, or opportunities. And again, like, I don't think that is something that Edward or me would say that I did wrong, but something
Mhm.
I wish I had done differently now, for sure.
Mhm.
Does that resonate as an example?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think a lot of listeners will find that it does as well. This episode is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education and Sacramento Reiki Center, where we support full-time grievers every day. Many of our clients have tried everything and it still hasn't been enough. After our work together, they gain the tools and skills that they need to navigate their grief on their own. You can get more information at sacramentoreikicenter.com and centerforoemotionaleducation.com. I'm curious if that sensation of wishing you had done something differently does it change your daily behavior now?
There's some irony. Yes, is the short answer. There is, like, some painful, I don't know if it's irony or not. Painful coincidence around that for me is that my whole life that I can remember, especially since I started having children. I've been really intentional about time I spend and communications I give. Like when my children are leaving the house, or when it's the last thing I'm saying to them, regardless of anything else, the last thing I'm saying to them for a period, I make sure that it's "I love you." And I do that because I want to make sure that if that's the last time I see them or that they hear from me, that's the last thing that they heard. And I have a sense that even though that's so important to me, I didn't. Now my perspective is that I didn't do enough of that with Edward, who, was vital to my existence. And he, like, he knows that I loved him. That's not a question, but it's just still like a different way that I now see my what I did before, and is sort of doubling down on what I now do moving forward, communicating that I love people more, making sure that I am touching base with the people that are important to me in my life regularly, even if it's just like a quick, hey, just thinking about you, just sending you something. Like my communication with my community has probably gone up like 300% since Edward's passing. And my care about communicating with community in that ongoing way has also gone up. I mean, his death has actually changed so much for me about my perspective on myself and my life and what I'm doing here, and how I interact. But that's one real keen example around this particular piece. I am way more in contact with the people that matter to me more regularly, making sure that they know that I'm thinking about them and that I love them.
That's really interesting, and it kind of shows the power of growth through grief. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean that to sugarcoat or silver line the hardship that I know you've been going through in your grief, but in that you have had this reflection on this growth of wanting to be more in touch and wanting to be more saying I love you to people, that it seems like it's actually turning you into a more expressively loving person, which is really beautiful for everyone around you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that's actually a gift of the the growing from the reflecting on what you could have done better. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I don't think I would be able to, I don't think I would have gotten to that point, or be moving in that particular direction, if I hadn't been able to do some forgiving here, what I
Mhm.
blew or didn't do well enough with Edward. Yeah.
The forgiveness of you forgiving yourself has allowed you to have that greater loving kindness towards others.
Yeah. Because earlier in earlier moments or periods of my grieving, it was like I had the sense that I had made such an incredible error with Edward, and I felt so much guilt around that, that the way I was sitting with it then, before the forgiveness came in, was, oh, well, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm not here to do what I thought I'm here to do. I can't help people the way that thought that I'm here to help people. Like, all of that was sort of like closed off because of this sense of, or was kind of closing down because of this sense of having really just messed up so badly with someone so important to me.
Mm. Wow. That sounds like a lot of inner critic stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I wasn't, I appreciate you like questioning the distinction, but it wasn't like I was like, you're a bad person. It was more like, you aren't who you thought you were.
Hmm.
And I was like, but I want to be who. It was just it was an identity crisis more than a heavy self criticism. But I hear what you're saying. Like, I wasn't. I had to forgive myself, so there was something that I wasn't liking for sure.
Yeah. I just think that that's a really common experience for a lot of people who are in professions that help other people.
Hmm.
That when they go through crisis and they fall apart, I think that it's really common to have a really hard time watching yourself fall apart when you are the one who is usually holding the space to keep everyone else together.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my work already, and part of my mission is not to always be together, not
Mhm.
to always seem like I have it all together, but to show up as someone authentically having the full range of feelings that people have, and that actually
Mhm.
being modeling that being part of my mission. But you're
Mm.
right. There's still a little of like, I think it's really common for people going through things to question, like, oh, am I even allowed to be seen going through this because I'm supposed to be the helper or the supporter or the one who
Mhm.
has it all together, which again, by the way, is not my mission. I'm not here to look like I'm the one who has it all together. I'm the
I'm
one.
so glad.
Yeah, my point is to be the one here looking like they're going through the stuff that we go through. And maybe I know how to use some tools, but anybody else can learn those tools too. And having those tools doesn't mean that you stop going through things. It just means that you know what to do when you go through them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
forgiving myself was a big part of being able to continue on in the work that I do and to continue to see myself as someone who can be of support to others, even
Yeah.
though I wish I'd been of more support to Edward, even though he wasn't asking for it.
I'm sure that I know I'm feeling this way, and I probably speak for the audience who's listening right now, having so much compassion towards your need to forgive yourself and towards this whole thing of forgiveness that you're going through, and I really appreciate your vulnerability of sharing this publicly and openly,
Hmm.
because I'm so sure that you sharing it in this way is helping other people listening to reframe their stories as well. Of because what you just said is I had to forgive myself that I wasn't there to support my brother better, who was not asking for support.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Yep.
that's a really common story.
Yeah.
It's a really, really common story, and I think that you are just such a good example of someone still working through that. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm. Yeah. Thanks for being here with me.
Yes, it's kind of a reiteration of what I said in the guilt episode, which is also from the Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz. One of the agreements he has is always do your best.
Hmm.
And if you either looking back on your actions with this person, or you can choose to do this going forwards in all your future actions, if you are always doing your best, it makes it so that when something bad happens, you know that you did your best to show up and that it wasn't your fault. And that can really help to release the inner judge, the inner critic, to soften the tone.
Yeah. And I can definitely speak to like owning that as an orientation being so useful instead of just like, oh, I heard that one time and okay, maybe I'll let it sink in. I think I, to some degree, really have been able to own that as an orientation. And so I do have the sense that I didn't know enough is really the bottom line. And that's how I sit with it now. I just didn't know enough about so many things, but particularly about, helping Edward in ways that would have been maybe more supportive to him
Mhm.
and about grief for that matter. So like having that orientation of I did my best. I'm always doing my best. I'm going to continue to just do the best that I can no matter what. There is a balm in it. If that's something that you own as the way that you live your life, then I think it does give you a little bit of resilience or something to fall back into when you have a moment of seeing that you wish you had done something else.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, thanks for listening to Full Time Grievers. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you find out when we release the next episode. If you have thoughts or questions about what we shared, please leave them in the comments below. And if this episode made you think of someone, we invite you to send it to them. They could probably use it. Also, don't forget to get your free Receiving Support While Grieving guide in the show notes below.